What's up, guys? Today we're doing another episode of Weapons and Weaknesses. This is one of my most anticipated fights of the year because it's a very competitive fight. You got Ilia Topuria, somebody who is very, very dominant. Now Max Holloway, legendary 145er, former champion, and really in the last 4 or 5 years, if it weren't for Volk just sort of, having the upper hand in that matchup with Max Holloway, we all know Max Holloway would have been the champion for the last 4 or 5 years. So highly competitive fight. Max Holloway, very experienced. It's kind of amazing that Max Holloway is only 32 years old because it feels like he's been in the UFC forever. I think he made his debut when he was probably like 20 years old or something. Right now, Topuria is a pretty decent favorite over Max Holloway. I think part of the reason why is, like I said, number one, he just looks unstoppable right now. Whereas Max has had some ups and downs. We've never really seen Topuria, we've never seen him lose for one, but we've rarely even seen him be losing in a fight, right? The closest thing we've had to that was Jai Herbert, and of course he knocked him out in the second round. I think that's one factor. The other factor I would say is I think there's a little bit of MMA math going on here. Alexander Volkanovski is undefeated against Max Holloway. Topuria knocked out Alexander Volkanovski, so, you can see where that kind of maybe makes people think that Topuria is likely to beat Max. I think that's kind of a superficial and maybe a short-sighted way to predict that fight. I think there's a little more nuance to it because obviously Max and Volkanovski are different fighters, so their fights against Topuria are going to look a little different. So let's start with Topuria. Topuria's game plan is fairly consistent against all of his opponents. He has a heavy boxing style. He has a very bladed stance, keeps his shoulders shrugged, hands up high, chin tucked. He doesn't really kick that much. He occasionally does low calf kicks, but in general, he has a more traditional boxing style. But in general, he's pretty patient when he's in the center of the octagon. Mostly relies on his jab, but where he gets dangerous is when he backs his opponents up to the cage. A lot of his opponents seem to have sort of a fight or flight response. They sort of feel like, I'm backed up, he's closing in on me, I have to sort of fight my way out of this situation. And he's very, very, very good at landing power shots in the pocket. And that's where I think his greatest strength is. He generates a ton of power with his shots in the pocket, as we've seen. Knocked out Volkanovski, knocked out Jai Herbert, knocked out Damon Jackson, and it was all more or less the same situation. He's also very, very, very good at switching up targets. And I think that's where a lot of the openings that he finds, that's how he creates those, is by switching targets. The knockout against Jai Herbert and Damon Jackson are really good examples of that. He went to the body in the shot right before the knockout shot. Sometimes that's just enough to make them a little bit distracted, slightly less prepared for that knockout shot. And it's always the shots that you aren't expecting that do the most. He also, of course, generates a ton of power, right? He's very good at keeping his hooks really short, keeping his arm at a nice 90-degree angle. It reminds me a lot of Pereira, right? It's very much a whole body movement when he throws his power shots in the pocket. He prefers to have his opponents up against the cage when he's really trying to deal the damage, take chances, take risks. But when he's in the center, a lot of times he's very defensive, waits for his opponent to come forward, and then he'll slip and then look to counter. And when he does counter, he really, really, really commits to it. Topuria has looked dominant throughout his entire UFC career. He's undefeated, but the fight that people tend to point to where he maybe showed some holes in his game was his fight with Jai Herbert, because he nearly got knocked out in the first round and then sort of rallied, came together, and got the knockout in the second round. It's important to note that, that was a short notice fight for one, and two, he was going up in weight. Right? He's a 45er. That fight was at 155. But it's not just the fact that he was going against a heavier opponent, but Jai Herbert had an 8-inch reach advantage against him, and he was the very fast, sort of twitchy striker stylistically. And I think, Topuria really struggled with the range in that fight. Topuria got hit with a really big left hook about 30 seconds into the fight, and 10 seconds later he got dropped with a massive head kick that, to be quite honest, it's kind of amazing to me that didn't knock him out. Pretty much landed flush on the chin and dropped him. The big thing in that fight was Topuria he had a bad habit of dropping his right hand every time he was throwing his left hand. And it's kind of uncharacteristic of him because he's usually very, very good defensively. I think one of the reasons that kick landed so well for Jai Herbert, though, was the fact that he was throwing it in combination. He threw across. Topuria slipped on the outside, and then when Topuria was looking to counter with his right hand over the top, he followed up with his left hand, and that's where Jai Herbert landed that kick. Topuria is so good defensively that if you're going to try and land kicks on him, it's not smart to do it just out in the open without any kind of setup. Because Bryce Mitchell actually was throwing a lot of kicks when he fought Ilia Topuria, but it was largely unsuccessful because he wasn't really setting them up with anything else. For the most part, Josh Emmett got completely destroyed by Ilia Topuria, but there were a few moments where Emmett would load up, Topuria would back out, expecting that shot, and then as Topuria would look to counter with his huge right hand, there were a few moments where Emmett saw that coming, he slipped, and Topuria got way overextended. And I do think that there is a possibility for Max to land there. But in general, I think the high kick landing off some crazy combination, it's a little bit of a long shot, though I do think Max has the skills to do it. But in general, though, I think because Topuria has more of a boxing style, kicking has been somewhat of a weakness for him. Topuria has a very bladed stance, and so the low calf kick will be there all night long. Max is also very good he does this teep to the lead leg that he did really well when he fought Justin Gaethje. I think that would also be a great option. Volkanovski actually threw quite a few kicks against Topuria, but they weren't part of any crazy combinations, and so none of them had any serious impact, but I think they did the job of disrupting that I think Max can also accomplish with his kicks. Max has an awesome spinning back kick. He will definitely be doing that, but I think he also needs to be careful about when he does them. And usually Max is very good about that. As Topuria is coming forward, or as Topuria is circling around to the outside, those are always good options because if you throw the spinning back kick out of nowhere, it is somewhat risky because you are exposing your back. Valentina Shevchenko versus Alexa Grasso is a really good example of how if you just throw them without any kind of setup, it can be a little bit risky because you're exposing your back, right? But in general, I would say because Topuria has such a boxing heavy approach, I think kicks can be a really clear way for Max to disrupt his forward pressure. Now let's talk about Max. I think Max path to victory here is through a decision. So when we're talking about, his best weapon and his greatest weakness in this fight, I think we kind of have to look at it through that lens. Max is well known for having an incredible gas tank and for being very, very durable. And I think, for this fight to go to a decision, that's kind of the backbone of all he's going to do in this fight. I think on offense, he can keep a high output for 5 rounds, and on defense, he can take a lot of hits without it affecting his mentality, without him withering away and sort of abandoning his game plan. So I think in general, the things that Max needs to be doing on the feet, we already talked about a lot of them, but low calf kick, teeps to the lead leg. He's got a really nice cross to the body. He did it really well when he fought Justin Gaethje. He also has a great uppercut. He did that also pretty well against Justin Gaethje, and especially in his second fight with Volkanovski. When he throws, let's say a jab or something like that, and his opponents are rolling under his shots, he's really good at finding that angle to land the uppercut as they're rolling. Because Topuria has a very traditional boxing style stand-up, he does a lot of rolling and bobbing and weaving when it comes to his defense and slipping shots. And I think that's a really great opportunity for Max to land uppercuts because he's kind of susceptible to them. But in general, Max's objective here should be to disrupt Topuria, to never let him start to develop his offense and pressure forward and get him on the back foot. I think for Max, if they can go shot for shot, whether it's jabs or leg kicks, it's not the most exciting way to win, but I think that's where Max is going to avoid that part of Topuria's game that makes so many people crumble. He actually did this really well against Justin Gaethje. Now, of course, he did trade in the pocket a handful of times throughout that fight. Of course, there was the just insane ending. I don't think he should do that. I don't think it was smart for him to do it in that fight. It's not smart for him to do it in this fight, but who knows? Max is just that guy. He might do something like that. But in that fight with Gaethje, he was very focused. He picked his shots, and Gaethje, it looked like he just couldn't really get any kind of offense going. I think that's because so much of what Max was doing was disrupting him. Within the last few years, I think most people would agree that Max Holloway's worst performance was his third fight with Volkanovski. I think it was back in 2022 or something like that. But In that fight, he got completely shut out, which is really rare to see for Max because generally he's leagues above everybody else in the featherweight division. And he even had really competitive fights with Volk in their first 2 fights. So it was kind of a surprise that Volk completely shut him out. The obvious difference between Max and Volk in that fight was Volk's speed. I mean, Volk looked faster than I think he ever had at that point. And Max just didn't really have an answer to Volk's jab and his inside leg kick. And Volk's counters were extremely fast too. Topuria is good at jabs. He's got a great jab and he's got really good counters as well. But I don't think he has the speed that Volk had in that third fight. I've never seen Topuria as snappy as Volk was. I think Topuria has more power than Volk, but I don't think he has the same speed. So that might not be as big of an issue in this fight, but there's a bigger issue that Max had in that third fight with Volk that I'm a little more worried about in this fight with Topuria. A lot of the times when Max would blitz in with some sort of combination, he would get a little bit lazy and he would let his guard down a little bit. I think even the bigger problem is that he tended to kind of hang out in the pocket a little bit after he finished his combination. And that's where Volk was able to land a lot of his counterattacks. And Topuria, especially in the center, is almost always focusing on counters, especially his big right hand, whether it's a hook or an overhand. He's always looking to counter with that right hand. And if Max blitzes in and doesn't back out of the pocket after he finishes his combination or exits out to the side or whatever it is to kind of stay out of the way of the counters, I think it could be a big problem for him. So Max needs to be aware of that when he's looking to land shots and score points on the feet, especially in the center, because I think that's where Max needs to keep the fight. I think he needs to avoid getting backed up to the cage by disrupting Topuria like we talked about. But in the center, when Max is throwing, Topuria is always going to be looking to counter. So Max just needs to be aware of that. When he's blitzing in, he's got to back out and not hang out in the pocket, because I just think he's kind of playing into Topuria's strengths when he does that. This is a hard fight to call because I think both guys are very, very good. They both have a pretty clear path to victory. Topuria needs to pressure Max, force him back, control the center, and then look for the big power shots when he has Max backed up against the cage, as he does so well against everybody. And when he's in the center, he needs to look for counters, right? Because like I said, Max can tend to sort of hang out in the pocket a little bit when he finishes his combinations. And I think that's where Topuria can maybe win rounds over if he doesn't have as much success backing Max up. Whereas Max needs to avoid the cage, stay in the center, pick his shots carefully, and disrupt Topuria, prevent him from just moving forward and bullying him and backing him up. He needs to throw his cross to the body, which he's very good at. He needs to throw his outside leg kick. He needs to throw his teep to the lead leg. And if he is going to try and land his power shots, whether it be, an uppercut or some kind of crazy head kick or something like that, he has to throw those in combination, because that's where he's going to have the highest success with Topuria. If he just tries to throw head kicks or things like that just out in the open without any kind of combination to distract Topuria, I just don't think it's going to land, and I think he might be putting himself in a risky situation where Topuria could look to counter. So if Max is going to try and look for power shots, he's got to do those in combination, but in general, I think his objective should be to frustrate Topuria, prevent him from just backing him up, and ride his way to a decision. Honestly, my gut kind of tells me that Topuria is going to win this fight, though I kind of want Max to win. Topuria is a great fighter, but he has yet to win me over just as a likable person, I guess. I don't know. He does a lot of trash talk, but when you trash talk, there has to be a certain level of charm to it for it to actually kind of have a positive effect. And there are guys that are good at that, I mean, McGregor, obviously, I think a lot of the reason why he became so popular was because of his trash talk. People like Sean Strickland for the same reason. But some guys, when they do trash talk, it just doesn't have, it just doesn't have the same positive effect. I think Topuria is just one of those guys. Whenever he talks trash, it just seems to kind of make me like him less instead of more. I don't know, maybe that's silly, but I kind of want Max to win, but my gut kind of tells me Ilia is going to win. He looks so unstoppable, and I think he's not a fluke. I think that all of these wins he's had, I think he's just genuinely that good. He reminds me a lot of Islam Makhachev in that way. I didn't think that Islam, beating all these guys on his way to a title was because he was can crushing or something. I knew he was just that good. And I think Ilia is the same way. I think he's the real deal. That being said, Max is very experienced. He's still young, still at the prime of his career. He just came off a win against Justin Gaethje, which was arguably one of his, if not his best win in his entire career. He looked very good. He looks strong. He's durable. He's got great cardio, and he's smart. He's a smart fighter, and all those things play into his path to victory. Even then, I still think he has that nuclear button. He has that crazy power, and he absolutely has the skill to pull off some kind of crazy knockout again. So in that way, a plus 200 underdog, not a bad pick. I think this fight is very, very close. It's just a matter of who can implement their game plan. I didn't really talk about wrestling at all. Both guys have really good takedown defense. I just don't see the fight going in that direction. But if somebody is going to wrestle, I think it's going to be Topuria. He comes from more of a wrestling background than Max does, and we've seen him, I think, wrestle more in his career, more offensively. I don't see the fight going in that direction, though. It would be cool. I think it would probably surprise a lot of people if this fight ended up turning into a grappling match. Anyways, that'll do it for this one. Enjoy the fights this weekend. I'm going to be reacting to them, and I'll try and post the reaction to that as soon as possible. Thanks for watching.